All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you to everyone out there, as always, for listening to the show, watching. Appreciate you all very much. I also appreciate today's sponsor, Sunny Reds, 1531 Abbott Road, 5 minutes or so away from Highmark Stadium. Some of the best wings you're going to get anywhere in Western New York. 50-cent wings Wednesday night. Every other Saturday, karaoke. I was there last week. That place was popping. Sunny Reds. All right, this is a special edition here of Talking Buffalo. This is our 7-year anniversary. I launched this podcast exactly to this day 7 years ago. So, on that note, to celebrate a milestone episode here for me, Talking Buffalo, I had to go back to one of the literal OGs of the show, Moran podcast back in those days. My man, Tim Graham from The Athletic. To tell you how long ago that was when I launched this, it was Tim Graham from the Buffalo News at that time. What's going on, Tim? How you doing? Thank you very much for joining me on a milestone episode of Talking Buffalo.
It does feel good when you say it's so long ago I was at the Buffalo News, because there was a period of time there, and sometimes there's still some of this rattling around in my brain, like, hey, is this athletic thing really going to work? So when you're talking about it's been so long ago that I was at the Buffalo News, that feels all right. Now, of course, we're owned by the New York Times now. That gives us quite a long runway, maybe into oblivion. I don't mean negatively oblivion. I mean like to the horizon. Maybe I should say, there's a nuance there. Oblivion is, maybe off the cliff, whereas to the horizon is you don't know what's beyond. But it feels good to have been with you through all my iterations and all your iterations. You still trying to get that newspaper off the ground, Pat?
No, I think I gave up on that quite a while ago. That was a great idea, though.
We've all moved on from newspapers. But that was a hell of a periodical you put out there.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed boosting it. I wanted it to work, that there's a place for it. I still think there's a place for it in a different form, but there's a lot missing, I think, in the local sports scene that fans, that readers, that viewers, that they're missing from the way it used to be when it came to media. We can go back to Two Newspaper Town. Those don't exist anymore. But
no.
When the newsroom had general assignment reporters just waiting for something to happen, as opposed to the way it is now, where things don't get covered because you don't have enough people to do it.
Yeah, for sure. My history with you, well, it precedes this podcast for sure. I still remember the Baby Joe Macy days with you. Obviously, your days at ESPN, where you, like you said, you really helped boost me and kind of get my name out there to a lot more people. But even just with this show specifically over the last 7 years, got a pretty good history. Like I said, you were on my 2nd episode ever. You were on my 100th episode ever. I actually went and did the homework on this. Some of this might trigger a couple memories for you. We actually did a live show together at Audubon North in Amherst.
Absolutely. It was my first time there.
Yeah. I don't know if I've been back there since. I think I may have 1 or 2 times. Very underrated things, especially chicken fingers. I love that place.
It was insanely busy that night.
Yeah,
it was in the summer. There were people outside, inside. It was a good energy.
They had I think they sponsored a couple softball teams that had come back afterwards too. So anyway, I had you there at Audubon North. You've been with me live at Imperial 3 different times. You and I shot the shit, just us two once. You were live with Sal Capaccio once there with me. You were fighting an illness that day too. I remember you had a really sore throat, but you ate some hot wings that night and you got through it. Your voice actually improved throughout the show. I remember that very much. That was a lot of fun. We had a done with
the beer might have something to do with it too, Pat.
Oh, I'm guarantee it did. We had a done with Graham reunion once at Imperial Pizza. To this day, that was still one of my favorite episodes. I got to say this too. I give you guys a lot of credit. Now, obviously, you're known as a writer. Tyler's known as a writer, but back in those days, you guys really we're amongst the first to have a true podcast in the Buffalo market, and one that clicked and resonated with people. And I don't say this lightly, I mean it. Like, I kind of drew some inspiration from, I mean, go back, everybody, and listen to that show from, like, that was about 2 years ago now that we did at Imperial. But Done with Graham was a hell of a podcast, man. And again, I enjoy you guys for your writing, of course, but that was a kick-ass podcast. I really enjoyed it. Plus, you guys were the originators of doing your podcast on locations. Like, you were always at some bars, usually with some shitty
Quality
audio
wasn't always
equipment.
great, but I mean, that's the, all credit to Tyler for that.
Yeah.
That was his equipment. He brought the idea and the equipment with him from Green Bay. And that was something that he seized on when he returned to the Buffalo News.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed covering the Bills together quite a bit. And that was, I think it showed through in the podcast. We would get together and usually over beers, sometimes we would do it at lunch and we would control ourselves a little bit, but we'd have a couple of beers out at the Swanee House or Essex. No, not Essex, but the Lennox. I can all kinds of different places we did it out there at we did it out at the harbor a couple of times. Yeah, really enjoyed doing that. That was all his idea, and he wanted to do it. And hell, whenever he says, let's meet tonight or tomorrow at 7 and pod, I was ready to go.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun, man. It really was. Like I said, it was very original back in those days. The market was not saturated with podcasts, of course, like it is nowadays. And then the last time we hooked up was actually last summer. We did Mafia Con together, that event that Del Reed put on when it was like 90,000 degrees out. And I'm not going to say you were being a diva. I was totally being a diva. We were not going to do that podcast inside. It was like 1,000,000 degrees in that kind of warehouse or whatever the hell it was. So we kind of set up shop and we did it outside. I was like,
we found a patch of shade.
Yeah, I found very little bit of shade. That's when I remember, that was right before you dropped that Terrell Bernard feature, which was a great feature. Learned a lot about him. You went down to Texas to spend some time. So, yeah, man, it's been a minute. Over these last 7 years, do you feel older? Do you feel wiser over these past 7 years? Or you kind of get into a point where you're like me? I'm just feeling older, man. I'm starting to forget shit all the time.
Yeah. 7 years. So 7 years, I was at the tail end. I was only at the Buffalo News for a few more months.
Right. Yep.
At that point, I joined the Athletic in the summer of 2018 or late spring, I think. I'd have to go back and check the exact.
It was around May. It was around May. I remember that because it was like a bombshell. Like, it was like, holy shit, all these people are leaving the Buffalo News.
Yeah.
In the Athletics, some news started to trickle out. Yeah, it was big news back then.
Yeah, that was a dicey time at the Buffalo News. And it was really the first time at the Buffalo News where I began to wonder about my future personally, but not that I was directly impacted, but the future of the business, the future of the paper, because ever since I joined the paper back in the year 2000, it was owned by Warren Buffett, had one of the strongest unions in the country. Had one of the highest penetration rates in the country. In fact, I think it was number one for a few years running. And what a penetration rate is in the newspaper business is it's the number of people who can subscribe to the paper and do. And I believe the Buffalo News was up around 70%. So imagine that, like 70% of the population where you are. I mean, the Buffalo News was making money hand over fist off of classifieds and subscriptions. And it was just super, super strong. And it's one of the reasons why the Buffalo News was one of the last major newspapers to get online. They did not have live online. I mean, they would have some sort of static page where they'd give you some headlines, but it wasn't until 9/11 that the Buffalo News felt, okay, we need to actually update our website as the day goes on here as a public service type thing. But up until then, everybody else was giving it away. And I think you can look back and the stubbornness of the Buffalo News was probably smart. We as reporters hated it. We thought it was stupid, but what do you know in this business? You're guessing all the time. We just thought, hey, we look old, we look archaic. All these other papers have live websites. Our presses at the time looked awful, but it's because there was no need to invest in them. we were making so much money. There was no, you remember those
Right.
dresses back in the early 2000s? The
Yeah.
color was always out of whack, and
Mhm.
it was terrible. Color photography was pointless until they invested all that money in the mid aughts on the printing. But yeah, I think that going back to that time when Bucky Gleason and Jerry Sullivan left, and followed by Bob DeCesare, and John Vogel, I think, was the first of the group to go. And then not long after, Amy Moritz. And I didn't take the buyout. I wasn't allowed to take the buyout. And so, as a point of that, I kind of felt like I was being held hostage a little bit.
Yeah.
And I began to think, if I'm going to, and the Athletic, right around that time, the Athletic reaches out and says, "Hey, would you be interested if we were to open up an office in Buffalo? Would you be interested?" And I thought, well, yeah, I think probably if you called me 2 weeks ago, no, but I wanted to go, rather than be at something with uncertainty that felt like it was dying, or something with uncertainty but felt like the possibilities were endless. I'd go for the latter, of course. And so I
Sure.
bet on myself, went to the Athletic. Maybe we were going to be out of business in 3 years, but who knows about the Buffalo News? Now, lo and behold, here they are, still going 7 years later, still smaller, still more streamlined. I'd probably still be working there. I think, I mean, I'm confident that I probably would still be there. But I think I'd be miserable.
Yeah.
And, and that's not to say anything about the people. The people there I love. I think it's like what's going to happen next? Now I still have that. Probably in this business, you always will. I mean, the New York Times, maybe when my contract is up, they take a look at the spreadsheet and say, why are we spending this kind of money on this guy in Buffalo, New York? And decide to make a change. So I'll always have that.
Sure.
But to feel, the feeling about the entity and the product and the masthead and, the work that we're churning out, and the people are pulling together, and not just out of self-preservation, but because we're being able to do the work. Yeah, it turned out to be a good move. But that's not to say that I'm psychic. I mean, I wasn't sure.
Oh, you're rolling the dice at the time for sure. I remember because when I first started this podcast, it was weekly, February 2018, and it was more interview based sports media type conversations. And again, with this literally happened maybe 2 to 3 months after I started this podcast, I was like, holy shit, it's Tim Graham, it's Vogel, Joe B, Chris Baker. I remember too, originally was part of like that Athletic group. I was like, wow, this is huge. And here you are still, 7 years later. You know what? We're like yacht rock, man. You get better. We age well. All right. So you have aged well, just like yacht rock, man.
I don't know. I feel like I'm losing my fastball. I can tell, when I was younger and I'd see like Larry Felser, uh, not even going down to the locker room after, everybody thinks back on how great it was. Don't you remember Larry Felser? Man, reporters need to go back to the Larry Felser days. Yeah, maybe back in the 60s and 70s. But when I joined the Buffalo News, like Larry Felser wouldn't leave his seat the entire game. He wouldn't go to the locker room. He didn't ask a question. And by the time we got back up from our working in the locker room, he was gone. Like, Larry was mailing it in for several years towards the end, as a lot of people do. Right before retirement, you can probably look at, people aren't doing their best work right before they retire. So sometimes, and I would always look at that and say, man, don't these guys have some pride? And you know what it is? It does grind you down. I mean, and it's not hard work, but there age factors for sure. You lose some things, you erode, but also with me, there's a couple of things. The older I get, the more I wonder if sports matter at all. It's just like why are we doing this? It's just like hamster on the wheel. I mean, I know the hope, especially when you get to the end of the season and there's no more, that thing hasn't happened, whether it be the Stanley Cup or the Lombardi Trophy. It's kind of like, how different was this season than the other 60 that preceded it, right? I mean, it's
Right.
just, it becomes not monotonous, redundant. and you start writing stories that you're pretty sure you wrote 2 years ago or 5 years ago on a different player with a similar circumstance who's trying to break through. And isn't this what a heroic backstory this guy has? You've never seen anything like it, but you've seen it 1,000 times. And it gets to the point where it's like you have to really work so hard to find something that gets you jazzed to want to write it.
Yeah.
And again, that's good to drive. It's good drive. But then I think sometimes though you do fall into that trap of what's the point? I just need to file my story to get through the day, make my boss happy, and collect that paycheck. And I'm not saying I'm there yet, but I can understand it a lot more than I could have 10 or 15 years ago.
I wouldn't expect anything less than complete blunt honesty from you when I ask you literally anything. You know, it's funny too, because so I recorded, Del Reed's got a new series. Obviously, Del, a good friend to both of us. And I was a guest on the show, and he was asking me about some of my favorite people, to sit down with from the media. And I definitely mentioned you, but I also put a little caveat on there. A lot of these guys will come on, and no matter how dumb the questions may be or something like that. But I said, when it comes to Tim Graham, you better be ready to talk, better be ready to engage, and you better be on your A game, because if you ask stupid questions or you're not prepared, he's going to make you look stupid. I can't
not
recall
on purpose.
Not on purpose, not on purpose. But like I said, like I was half joking a few minutes ago. I said, I'm getting old. I don't remember shit. I do remember a couple podcasts you'd be on, and I'm like, these people ain't prepared. And I could tell by just the way they were standing there. I do want to ask you about something.
Do you have an example? I'm trying to think. I want to enjoy my.
I honestly
here.
can't.
I want to fully embrace this compliment.
I really truly can't. But just
okay.
Dumb questions. I'm telling you, and it stuck out to me. But obviously not enough to remember what shows, or just don't want to call anybody out on the air. But there's been a couple. Just trust me when I say that. I did want to ask you about something. Not just you, but sports media people that I've noticed a trend with later. Let me know if you agree with this or not. Certainly people with The Athletic, because actually that's where I notice it more than anywhere else with Joe B, Matthew Fairburn. And I think to some extent with yourself, as well as some other men and women in the sports media too, but the engagement, the interactions with fans seems to have slowed down some, maybe in the last 6, 12, 18 months. And that's not to say somebody tweets at Tim Graham and asks you a question and that you don't answer it. That's not what I'm saying. But like more and more, I see people from the media putting their stories up, like whatever's got to get put up, and then kind of bailing out from there. Yeah, Matt Perino's another one too. I've had conversations with Matt. He's told me straight up that his engagement with fans is a lot less. I certainly understand why, because there's a lot of well-meaning fans out there that truly want to interact with you guys and you girls out there. But there's also the trolls that really kind of weigh on you. And have you gotten yourself to a point where sometimes for you, it's not worth it? Like in the past, I know everyone knows Tim will be up sometimes late at night. You will go back and forth with somebody on whatever it is that they bring up. You know what I mean? They insult you, you're coming back at them. That's the way you're built and the way you've always been. But it just seems like the interaction with fans is really slowed down, and it's not as frequent right now. And I think that's by design. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I can only speak for myself, but I'm guessing, if you were to ask me to presume, I would think that it's similar for everybody that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Joe Biscaglia. I always like to say the full name because just in case there's somebody out there who doesn't know the icon that is Joe B.
Right.
Let's say Joe Biscaglia. He's got a pretty healthy audience. And I don't know necessarily how he's done it other than just he doesn't put up with much, but he's also not a big snarky dude. I mean, he's hilarious, but he doesn't dunk on people.
Right.
And I think that I enjoy dunking on, if you're gonna alley-oop it right under my hoop, then I will alley-oop, then I will dunk. If you're going to spin on your hoverboard with the basketball over your head, like they did in the dunk contest, or pull the Kia right up underneath the basket. I will gladly dunk, or I used to anyway. But for me, it's the political climate And it's that
Yeah.
even going to Twitter or Blue Sky as a recreation or as just a diversion, I don't do it nearly as much anymore. And it's not because of the comments or the engagement. It's, Twitter as my news feed was very valuable. And now it just isn't that anymore. It can't be. It's just too littered and jammed with other bullshit that I
Yeah.
can't get the satisfaction out of it. And it's not as though I need um, my beliefs to be, uh, stroked or anything like that. It's just I can't find the things that I found interesting nearly as much anymore. Search engines are even like that. When you Google something now, you used to be able to get the answer right at the top of the screen. Now you got to fight through a bunch of things to
Yeah.
find the answer you're looking for. Twitter, of course, is just it's just a lot of political dunking. And so I think it's gotten to the point, and I was just talking about this with my class a couple of weeks ago. I teach a sports journalism class at Canisius University,
Hmm.
and in fact, Matt Perino was in. He was talking to the class, and the point was made. I used to have a policy when I was at the Buffalo News that I responded to every email sent to me. I took it as a point of pride. It was just kind of like a trademark thing that I did. Uh, I just thought it was cool that somebody would take their time to write me an email, positive or negative. And I would try to reason with the people who thought or had a quibble, if they in a healthy way. If they came at me in a healthy way, I would, we would have a discussion. If they came at me in an unhealthy way, I would still write back and thank them for being a subscriber. We can agree to disagree type thing. And inevitably that person would write back and say, hey, I didn't think anybody would even see this. Sorry if I came on too strong. It was good discourse, healthy discourse. And then comment sections became the email. And the comment sections, as everybody knows, have turned into cesspools. In the beginning, they weren't always. The Athletic had a lot of governors on the comments when the Athletic launched, that it was going to be a place for healthy discussion. There was no, I mean, it was, people were astounded when you'd go into the comment section at the Athletic, and we got so big, and the pool of people is just so massive now that you're getting people who are, it's gotten to be a place that's not worth my time to go down there and check the comments. So Twitter, the engagement that you would have that was rewarding, even when you were jousting with somebody, even when you were battling trolls, I found it to be amusing. I wasn't doing it because I was pissed off. Like a
Hmm.
lot of people, I think there are some people who will respond to negative tweets because they're angry. I would do it because I was thoroughly amused. I loved it, and it would bring a smile to my face. Um, but that went away. And I think that the Twitter is now turned into the comment section. Everybody just says something because they can. And I get that. It's always been that way. But I think it's just devolved and it's become deteriorated to the point that there's no good that comes out of it. And so I still will occasionally check. For instance, I had some thoughts last night about Richie Incognito being totally exonerated. People say, no, he wasn't totally exonerated. That's not even Omar Kelly of the Miami Herald wrote a completely misguided column saying that the Wells investigation was based on a lie. No, it wasn't based on a lie. Jonathan Martin recently came out and says he just wished he didn't cooperate with the investigation. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And there's
Right.
verifiable evidence that it did happen. There was a 144-page report on it of all kinds of things that happened. It wasn't a lie. And so I just pointed out a couple of things because sometimes I see things getting sideways on social media, and I want to let's clarify this. And every couple hours, I'd be like, all right, what a-hole is, dunking on me or telling me to, crawl back in my hole, or calling me a social justice warrior. And I glance, and this is on Blue Sky now, which I find to be healthier, but also, I'm still not on it all the way.
Right.
But nobody was really commenting. People are liking it, or people are retweeting it or reposting it, whatever they call it on Blue Sky. But I'm checking just all right, what are they saying? But other than that, I'm not going on there to look. I'm not constantly refreshing. All right, let's have an argument. Let's have a discussion. I used to do that. And it's just that's gone away.
Did you
I
find
don't
it
think I'll ever
draining?
get that back. I feel better without it.
I was going to say, did you find it draining at some point? I've always said this about you, Tim. I was like, you could have 10 followers on Twitter. Tim will treat you the same if you got 10 followers or you got 10,000 followers. That shit don't matter. But if you think because you only have 10 followers and you're going to talk shit to Tim, that he's not going to come back at you, that he's not going to dunk
Right.
on you because you only got 10. Oh, it's not working. And you only got 10 followers. Bullshit. You're going to get after that person if somebody annoys you or pisses you off or amuses you, like you
It was
said,
content.
whatever it
You know,
may be.
if somebody said something to me and I could immediately come up with something that I found that amused me,
Mhm.
then I would tweet it. It was just that simple. If I didn't, I moved on. So for me, it was just content. It was like a branding type thing, I guess. But it was never forced. And so, yeah, if you had 10 followers and you wanted to say something stupid and were leading with your chin, I would gladly make an example. And because I was sending it out to my audience, it was for me. It wasn't to put you in your place. It was for me to like stand up at the bar and be like, hey, get a load of this asshole. And everybody would have a good laugh. It wasn't, and then we'd be like, all right. And then we'd go for as long as that person wanted to keep going. So no, it wasn't, it wasn't like there's a certain member of the local media that you can almost picture him like, needing to pace around after every response to a follower, maybe go out and have a smoke if he were to smoke. I don't think he does, but there are people who you could see this, you can almost sense the steam coming out of their ears when they're responding to their haters on social media. With me, I always just kind of took it as a semi compliment.
I can envision you talking about me on a much smaller scale, but that's honestly, I've gotten better though, but that's how I would get. It would devolve.
It can ruin your day. It can.
It absolutely can. And it has. Now, what I've done is focus. I've started muting a lot more people now, and it really has been a game changer for me. I've muted
I used to not block. I went through a phase where I didn't block, but I'm blocking now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mute block. I've done both, but it's definitely, there's certain people, outlets, words that I have muted more and more so every day. And it has definitely made my experience better. But to your point, Twitter's not what it used to be. It's nowhere near as fun for me as it used to be.
And I'll tell you why I block instead of just mute. I did the mute thing forever. No blocks for years and years. But then some things got ugly, and I don't recall specifically what it was. And it crossed a line. And I thought to myself, why am I letting people in my thread see what this guy has to say? They were, I do recall what it was. There was some guy who kept trying to tell people that I'd stolen from a hospital, that some charity work that I did, that I was grifting and that I was stealing the money. And so the thing being was I'd never done charity work for a hospital, number one. And I started going back at this person, and they're like, oh no, people who, if you think out there, reach out to me, I'll tell you the real story. People DM me, I'll tell you the real story about Tim Graham. I'm like, why the fuck? I just, after a while, I was just like, I don't want this person. And because what was going to happen. Every post I made about, a Josh Allen story, or how are the Bills going to replace Charles Clay? People would just be, that person would just be in there, biting at the ankles, So that's when I was like, you know what? I got to start blocking people. And, go do your campaign on your own time. Don't do it on my back. If you got a Tim Graham campaign you want to mount, do it on your own feed.
I'm here with our 7-year episode. Tim Graham from The Athletic is my special guest, talking media today. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk Bills. I doubt it though. But anyway, I want to talk to you about and now I know you don't work in TV, although technically you kind of do. You're part of the Channel 4 pregame show team. So technically you actually do, but the TV media landscape here in Buffalo, okay, Tim, it's changing so much right now. There was a span last year, late spring into early summer, in a span of about 5 episodes, like over the course of 3 weeks. I had Brianna Aldridge on from Channel 7. I had Lindsay Mopert from Channel 2. And I had Sarah Holland with me at Imperial Pizza. Actually, Brianna did an episode with me at Imperial Pizza as well. All three of them, very talented, young women here in the Buffalo sports media. And it's not just necessarily a man or woman thing. This is just a general observation. And fast forward 6 months later, they're all gone. All three of them are gone now. Lindsay's gone. Brianna went to Dallas. Lindsay's going closer to DC. And Sarah just came out over the last couple of days. She's going to be moving closer to home. And well, whatever she does next, that's her place to talk about. It's not mine. It's not my business. But point is, it's public knowledge that she is leaving Channel 4. I'll just leave it at that. Like the landscape is changing, Tim? Does it feel like no one's looking to stay here anymore? Like, when did Buffalo become? I know it's always been like a mid-market, you know what I mean? Like, you'd start at a very small market and you'd work your way up to Buffalo, and then maybe ultimately you go somewhere else. Now it seems more and more like people are starting at a place like Buffalo, and this has just become one of the first stepping stones to somewhere else. It just, I don't know, maybe it's just me and I'm paying more attention now than I did in the past, and this has happened a lot more in the past too. It just feels like no one is looking to stay in Buffalo anymore, minus the people who already got their lives built here.
Yeah. All right. So it's dangerous to look at this and say the women are leaving, because they're leaving for three different reasons. Brianna Aldridge got a promotion.
Yep.
Sarah Holland, who just came in and also spoke to my class last Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got a totally different circumstance.
Yep.
So, but I will agree with you. So I'm trying to kind of unpack in my head the way you laid it out. I agree. It's become stepping stone-ish. I'm also thinking of all the different people who have just left the business out of not just sports, but anchors, like people you used to get the anchor chair. Erica Brecker, Chris Horvatitz. There's too many to come up with. So I'm not going to try, but there are so many people who are just leaving the business. Help me out here.
It seems, and again, I pointed out the women because I had them on my show over the course of 5 weeks, but it's not just the women. There's plenty of male, younger sportscasters. I know there was one from Channel 2 who just left not that long ago as well. It doesn't seem like anyone's staying in Buffalo more than maybe 2 years, 3 at the max. And again, maybe it's always been that way and I just haven't paid as much attention as I have recently, but like the days of growing up and you had the same sportscasters in Buffalo for 10, 15, 20 years, like they built their lives around Buffalo. Whereas now it just seems like people are coming out of college. I mean, some of these sportscasters are getting hired in their early 20s and they're getting jobs in mid-major markets like Buffalo. And then, like I said, they're gone. And look, fantastic. I know for sure in the case of Lindsay and Brianna, like you said, promotions, bigger markets. I'm not faulting them. I do the same thing. I know the money's not great. People are leaving the business. Who's the Channel 7? She was a female sports reporter. She works in the school district now. She's so much happier. God, the name's escaping me. Jennifer. Great sportscaster too. But to your point, people are just leaving the business altogether. It seems more and more. The TV media just seems so much more unstable now here in Buffalo than it's been, at least in my memory. And I could be wrong, but that's the way it feels to me right now.
Yeah, you're thinking about Jenna Caleri, who was married to Paul Stockman. So that's a double whammy. Those are two people who left the business. Paul Stockman at Channel 4 married Jenna Caleri at Channel 7, and they left the business together. They're still in town. They could still be doing that job if they wanted to, but they chose to leave the business. Nick Filipowski left the business.
There's others too. Yeah.
There's so many. And I think what it is that the pay is gotten worse over time. The workload is not hard, but in this business, we've talked about it before. It's tough. It's tough on your family life and your social life. Like, so if you're not married, it's hard on your social life. If you are married, it's hard on your family life. And
Mhm.
that's because you're constantly working nights, weekends, and holidays. That's when sports are played. So therefore, everything from your childcare to raising the kids, seeing them play their sports and the play and the chorus concert and all that stuff, it's difficult to do. And if you're not getting paid much, it's hard to see the reward for working in sports. Just because you're working in sports doesn't mean you want to do it for free. And so it is a bit of a grind. And I think that, we're talking about a lot of these names that we've mentioned, and it's interesting. Mary Margaret Johnson, also multimedia journalist from Channel 4,
She
left.
was
She's
great.
working at Damon now. But
Yeah.
um, a lot of these people are leaving for jobs in school communications. I find it interesting, right? Whether it be
Mhm.
university or the high school level. Nick Filipowski at the Williamsville School District,
Yeah.
Paul Stockman, I think, is at Nichols. I just think it's interesting that they get into communications because those jobs are out there and they pay pretty well. And you can work from 9 to 5 and see your son play his little league game, and watch your daughter at her soccer game or whatever it be, or just be there for dinner around the table at 5:30 or 6 o'clock.
Yeah. It just, I look at it like well, everything to me in life is sports, but like guys like you and Adam Benini and Mark Gaughan, guys, you guys are like the pros. Like you could follow the career, a nice long career. Whereas it seems like the people who are entering this market now are like college teams or college players. They're here for a year or two, and then they're transferring to
Yeah,
another
Sarah
school.
Holland
They're
straight out of
transfer
UB,
portal.
which is how
Yeah,
how common is that you get a job in a market like Buffalo right out of college?
yeah,
Usually you go to Elmira or Bozeman, or wherever you're somewhere, you got to leave and come back if you want to work in a market like Buffalo. But yeah, she's played softball at UB for a couple of years. Uh,
she's
Decides she
great.
just wants to get into it, even though UB doesn't have a journalism major
Mhm.
or the student television opportunities or the different things that you can do at other schools that offer journalism as a major. And she made it on her own and then figured it out,
Yeah,
and now here she is getting the job and she needs to leave it.
yeah,
So, um, yeah, I think that's a good example of how hard it is to keep people in the pipeline without getting them distracted or disillusioned or demoralized, because there are so many people who are willing to do it, and you really don't have any leverage when it comes time for that second or third contract. And you think, all right, it's time for me to start making some money because I want to put down roots and start my family. And the corporate office based somewhere in DC or Atlanta or New York City says, well, the numbers don't add up, because they don't necessarily care if you stay in Buffalo and raise your family like they did in the past.
yeah,
I don't know what Next Star thinks of gives a damn whether or not you are here for your entire career at Channel 4. There's somebody else who can come in and do the job. And yeah,
yeah.
I find that pretty fascinating. So who's going to Matt Beauvais, right? Matt Beauvais's from Grand Island. He's the sports director at Channel 7.
Mhm.
Josh Reed, I mean, he has roots here, but
Yep.
who's to say he doesn't leave at some point? Um, and when I say he
Uh,
has roots here, he's been here a long time,
mm,
but maybe he's, John Scott's from Ohio, and Heather Prusak. We went this far. We didn't even mention Heather Prusak. Did
I thought of her. I didn't know to say her, but yeah, man, Heather's
Heather
another
Prusak
one.
just left the
Loves.
business. Now,
I was
yeah,
a
she
huge
was
fan of hers,
doing
man.
well.
Huge
Now,
fan.
and I don't know how it lined up, but I think she left and then found out she was pregnant. It wasn't like she left to go have a baby.
Right.
So yeah, Jesus, how can we? I mean, that's my partner there on the Buffalo Kickoff Live show. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's yeah,
I
Matt
want to.
Beauvais. Matt Beauvais is the last remaining uh, heir to Rick Azar, right? He's the guy who could be the next. Uh, who is it for you? Who is the guy?
Rick
Van
Azar.
Miller,
I think
Rick Azar, Van Miller, all those guys.
I grew up a Channel 7 guy. When I was a kid, I grew up watching
John
Channel
Murphy.
7.
I'm
Noah
trying to think, like,
Murphy.
who's the most recent example of what we're saying doesn't exist anymore? John Murphy,
Yeah.
Adam Benini, maybe.
Yeah, Adam's still involved. I mean, he's retired in a way, but he's still around. So, like I don't get a chance to miss Adam because I still see him enough. You know what I mean? But yeah, either Adam or I would say Murph. I want to be careful too, Tim, because I want to make this
Ed
clear.
Kilgore.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For Ed Kilgore. I mean, I grew up on Ed Kilgore. So I'm saying I grew up on having the same people in my life watching the sports at 11:20 p.m.,
Right.
or 6:20 p.m. And it's just changed so much now. And I want to be really careful and say, make sure I say this the right way. I'm fans of them. And I also understand a lot more now than, before I had this podcast. I understand the reasons why people leave, whether it's a better opportunity, financial, lots of reasons, families. There's all kinds of issues. There are reasons that go into somebody coming and leaving. My only point is as a sports fan, somebody who just likes reading about sports, somebody who likes watching the news, watching sportscasts, it's tough to really you get locked in on somebody or some, channel 4. I'll just use them. They could use any of the 3 stations. And the turnover is just so much more than it used to be. It's really hard to get to know somebody. You start to get to know one. You get really used to them. You really start to enjoy the work they do, and then they're gone. I understand why for the most part, at least in most cases I do. I'm just saying as a sports fan, it's tough sometimes to really dig in and get to know somebody because they're gone before you really get to know them.
Julianne Pelosi. There's another one. I mean, how many we're like remembering? There's so many of them that we're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And there's probably still somebody else we're forgetting.
There's just not a lot of people that have been here more than 5 years at this point. I feel like we pretty much have named them the anchors. It's about it. It's about it. It's about it. It's a changing environment for sure. There's one other media thing that I wanted to ask you personally about, and because OJ Simpson passed away over this past year. Most polarizing figure, maybe in pop culture, certainly in my lifetime, I'd say for sure over the last 30 to 40 years, some of your best work of your entire career has went into having 2 sit downs with him. The first one, I remember the first one in 2018. And then you did a story on The Athletic when you were doing counting down the top 100 athletes. Another interview with OJ. That was in 2021. So you've had an opportunity to sit down again, one of the most polarizing figures, good, bad. Everybody has an opinion. I guess the question I'm trying to ask you is, I know about the articles. I've read them several times. They were great. Just the reaction. How did you prepare yourself for the reaction? Because you knew you were going to get reaction strong on both sides of the fence. How could you possibly want to talk to OJ Simpson? Conversely, I want to know all about what's going on with him, stuff like that. Just bracing yourself for the reaction. I can't imagine you had many stories in your career that had, that incited a stronger reaction than your work with OJ Simpson, which how many journalists on this earth got an opportunity to sit down with him at the length that you did multiple times?
He said that I was the only journalist he trusted.
Yeah.
At the end. And previously it was Linda Deutsch from the Associated Press who covered the trial and was based out in Los Angeles and did a lot of those things. But at some point, Linda Deutsch burned him, in which he told her something that was off the record, and she reported it, not for the AP, but she like told a gossip columnist or something and was quoted. And he was like, Linda, you don't even work it. So anyways, I don't know if that's a badge of honor or not, but to say that OJ trusted me, I will tell you this though, I have used that on people who are unwilling interview subjects. When people are like, nah, I just don't. When I'd be like, OJ trusted me. Like, if you can't get past that, I mean, if you can't see the value in that, I mean, then it's worked. And then they'll be like, oh, well, okay, well, yeah, we'll sit down and talk. I'm sorry about the sore throat. One sec. I've been wearing out this mute button.
Well, I appreciate you fighting through for me, man.
No. It's not that bad. It's just, I can't get rid of it. And I'm drinking coffee, which is not great. We're recording this at the moment. It's 5 minutes after 10 p.m. on Monday. I'm drinking coffee and it's drying out.
I'm drinking pop. So there you go. Neither of us are.
Hey, real quick, like we're going to get to OJ, but are you a sports card guy?
I'm not. I grew up one and I hate myself for not caring about my cards like I should have, because I had so many cards from the 70s and early 80s. But no, Not in this day and age.
I just got an eBay alert. So on a whim, I was watching one of an NFL Life on NFL Network. They're constantly showing those.
Mhm.
And they had one on Randall Cunningham a couple of days ago. They're unloading all their Eagles content now that they've won the Super Bowl. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm watching Randall Cunningham. And I'm like, man, what a badass. And I used that lead, the ultimate weapon. Remember that on the Sports Illustrated cover? The
Mhm.
ultimate weapon. And I used that as my lead 2 years ago on a Josh Allen season preview story in which I called him the ultimate weapon. Because if Randall Cunningham was the ultimate weapon, then it's Josh Allen in a fullback's body.
Right. Yeah.
That all right, it's Randall Cunningham plus about 40 pounds. Not bad.
I
So,
love Randall Cunningham.
so anyway, I go to eBay. What's a Randall Cunningham rookie card going for? I have 6 minutes to try to beat the current bid of $32. What do we think? $32 on a PSA graded 9 Randall Cunningham? I don't think it's worth it. I think I can get it for less than $30.
32
Um,
bucks.
okay.
I don't follow card values anymore. What I do know is that I had a huge collection as a kid, and I did all the stupid things with them, threw them, against the wall, things like that, played with them, probably several $1,000s worth. Anyway. Yeah.
What I used to like to do is take an eraser to the front of the card and you could make it white. Like you could put a thought bubble or take the guy's face off and put your own face on there. I used to do that quite a bit. I turned them into little works of art. Have you ever seen baseball card vandals Twitter feed?
Mm-mm.
Jot it down. Anybody
Baseball
out there?
vandals.
I think if it's not still active, I'm sure it still exists. Baseball card vandals, and that's exactly what they do. Is they take cards. It's vulgar. A lot of they turn these cards into doing a lot of inappropriate things. Highly recommended. Okay, so speaking of highly inappropriate, sitting down with O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. People were like, a lot of people wondered how nervous I was talking to him. Now, I didn't think he was going to kill me, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I was prepped for that interview, and I'd recall as it happened, I was dealing with an intermediary who didn't want him to do the story, or thought he wouldn't do the story, but was willing to pass it along. And he was surprised. The intermediary was surprised that OJ was willing to do it. Now, the first story that we did, I was going for a long play, and I had to endure a lot of criticism for it because the first was under the premise, and this was for the Buffalo News, that we only talk football. Now, that's the premise of the interview. That's what got him to sit down. But it's not all we talked about. And I anticipated that once he sat down and felt comfortable, he would talk about all kinds of things. And there are so many different issues that also relate to football that is going to stop the intermediary from like leaning in and saying, we're not going to talk about that. Now, here's the thing. And I wasn't sure what was this intermediary was the role he was going to play. He's not an attorney, but he had an official capacity. I'm being vague on purpose because this person doesn't want anybody to know who he is. Now that OJ's dead, maybe he doesn't care, but he didn't want people bothering him because he was OJ. He was the guy you needed to talk to get to OJ.
Right.
So yeah, and he didn't just he was at first upset that I even had his number. And then once I told him who I was, and he was okay with it. But when I'm entering this interview setting, I don't know how many intruders they're going to be. And intruders is an actual journalism, or it's an actual interviewing term. It's not an intruder, like just a person. An intruder could be noise. It could be, doing an interview in a gym with people bouncing basketballs all around you. An intruder could be the clock. It could be the fact that you have only 20 minutes. So I don't know what kind of intruders there are going to be during the course of this interview and what restraints there are going to be. Is OJ going to have all day for me? Is OJ going to be guarded? Is he going to have somebody constantly interrupting us saying, hey, OJ, are you sure you want to answer that? Lo and behold, lo and behold, it was one of the great interview settings of all time. We were left alone. We sat on a patio on the back of someone's house. It was
Yeah.
quiet. Really, the only constraint we had was he had a tea time at a very specific hour, and we needed to hit that. Other than that, we had all day, and I think I even ran out of questions because it got to be we were sat there forever. I'd exhausted my list of questions.
Hmm.
Um, Now, things that have to do with football that aren't really football related, things like CTE, which you can then use to talk about, the murders, right? People always wondered, hey, this guy, did he have brain issues that caused him to do that? We talked about CTE. We talked about all kinds of things around there. Like, so a mistake I thought it was transparent, but I think it turned out to be a mistake in that original story was we put a paragraph in there that we said what the constraints were within the interview that he agreed to. That the questions were limited to football. We weren't allowed to promote it. There were three things: no video. We weren't allowed to promote it, meaning, and their reasoning for that is we don't want you to try to make money off of this interview. I mean, we know you're going to because it's going to sell subscriptions and
Sure.
people are going to click on the site, but they didn't want us to turn it into like like have us advertise it.
Right.
And then the questions were supposed to be limited to football. All three, I think, reasonable things. Number one, we wouldn't have promoted it other than we teased it the day of. I tweeted out a picture of me interviewing OJ and saying, "Hey, story coming tomorrow," and people went, "Holy shit!"
Yeah, I remember
allowed
that.
to do that.
I remember that.
We weren't going to videotape it anyway because I went by myself, and I don't want to have to worry about the technological part of it when I'm trying to conduct one of the bigger interviews of my life.
Mhm.
And then the limited to football. I knew I wasn't going to just stick to football, and I knew he wasn't either. However, it was a long play interview for the next interview. Now, unfortunately for the Buffalo News, I left that paper, and the next interview was done for The Athletic.
Yeah.
And we had a series that we did that was going to be turned into a book, the 100 greatest players of all time. And when these books come out, we've done one for every sport. Other than baseball, for football, for basketball, and for hockey, we have an expert panel comes up with the list, and then the editorial staff kind of doles out who they want to do each story. I was given Ray Nitschke, Bruce Smith, and O.J. Simpson. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to write each story. There's no template. They didn't want all the stories to follow a template.
Right.
So I said, well, if I'm going to do O.J. Simpson, I'm going to do O.J. Simpson. Like, I'm not just going to do a book report type thing. And so I reached out to him and said, this is what the story is. It's for this, your number. I can't remember what number he was.
41.
Huh?
I think he was 41.
41.
41 or 44. One of them. I think it was 41 though.
Okay. Thank you. And he was curious where he was, and he wasn't argumentative about it. And he was just like, hey, and do you know who's ahead of me? And I was like, I can't give you the rundown, but I can tell you Jim Brown. Well, he wanted to know the running backs that were ahead of him. And I think he was pretty high on the running backs list. Like, you couldn't see any Barry Sanders. I think he would look at that. Even OJ and his ego would look at that and say, can't argue with that. Type stuff. But there were no constraints. I just said, we're going to sit down and we're going to do this interview. And and I said that the theme of the story is going to be your legacy. And he was agreeable to that. And he was agreeable to that based off of the first interview in which he came to trust me. I interviewed him on other things in between when the Bills gave out his number 32 to Sonoris Perry for the first time.
Yeah.
When Frank Gore entered became, what is he, third now in rushing, and I was talking to running backs, I would pick my spots. I wasn't just writing about, hey, everybody, it's OJ, it'd be like, bringing him out at a Bob Hope special. It'd be like, and everybody, it's Tim. I wasn't just showing off that I could interview OJ Simpson. I picked my spots for when it was appropriate. And so for that interview with the legacy of his, and we got into everything. We got into the murders. My first question to him was, what do you think the first paragraph of your obituary is how's it going to read? And I knew that was going to be my question. I knew that's where we're going to start, because that is a very common thing that we talk about in journalism among ourselves, or even about people. Like, hey, that's going to be in the obituary, or like, first off, is it in the obituary? Because what it is that's how important it was to how people are going to remember you.
Yeah.
Or that'll be a comment that gets made is that's going to be in the first sentence of this guy's obituary. Like, that's how big this is.
Yeah.
Josh Allen. I mean, you want to talk about legacy and everything. Probably the letters MVP will be in definitely the first paragraph of his obituary, maybe even in the first sentence, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Might be the second word, former NFL MVP, Josh Allen. However, I mean, those are how big. So we talk in those terms to try to telegraph the gravitas, or to explain the gravitas. And so I knew that that's how I was going to start OJ, because then he can't escape everything he's done. We're not there just to talk about being number 41 on the list. It is everything. And so, yeah, I think I handled it as well as I could. And now in regard to the fallout, I purposely did not read the tweet responses or the comments. I would occasionally glance at them and maybe grab one or two just to say, hey, I'm paying attention, but I didn't read them all.
Yeah.
Most people hated me for it. Thought I was, or at least I should say the comments that I did read, in terms of the way I absorbed them. Alan Bedenko was big on it. Alan Bedenko is a guy I respect, one of the Twitter, legends in Western New York, talking about trying to normalize OJ Simpson. I wasn't trying to normalize OJ Simpson. I mean, think of all the times, Charles Manson was interviewed over the years, or John Lennon's assassin, or the guy who shot Ronald Reagan. I mean, people would go into prisons and interview these guys all the time. Like, we're trying to get inside the mind. We're trying to learn, like, what does this guy think? How does this guy get through his day, in terms of, like, how does he cope? Like, what kind of denialism are you working with here? So I felt that it was worthwhile, no matter. And so I knew I was going to get blowback. And then I did my first radio show back when I was on terrestrial radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was ready to go, because I knew I was going to get calls. The podcast, we don't do calls, but on that radio show, I knew we were going to get calls. And the thing that was fascinating about that show is, I think I took, let's say I took 6 calls, which for that show was a lot, because we were only on for 2 hours and we had things we needed to get through. We didn't just open up the lines for the whole thing.
Yep.
I recall, I think I got one negative call. And we also had a guest that show too. Mike McDonald from Damon College was on. So that was another chunk of the show, but no, I'm mixing my, anyways, it doesn't matter. Women called. It was multiple women called to say, thank you for that story. We know OJ didn't do it. And I was like, what? I was just surprised by that. But a guy called, and he's like, why is this newsworthy? And a guy was telling me why this isn't newsworthy. And I had a list ready to go, and I read them off, and I made him sit there and listen to it, of all the outlets, the media outlets that aggregated my story. CNN, the New York Times, the London, the Telegraph, People Magazine, Fox News, like everybody, ESPN, you name it. And it was mainstream stuff. NBC News, whatever. Everybody talked about, had like OJ's talking. It was his first interview in a decade and a half, I think.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, the one where it really hit home for me, we may have talked about this on the show before, but it was the day after OJ was on my radio show, and we talked about various things. Talked about his time in prison. That was another thing. What was his prison life like? And he talked about that. That was considered football related. I don't know why. I think because he did fantasy football leagues or something. So he was, that's football. Yeah. We're talking football. And he'd talk about, how he befriended the Crips and the Bloods and all these, and he was just OJ in there. It was a fascinating look at his time in prison. And I'm driving down Dodge Road towards the 990, and I'll never forget it. And I'm listening to Howard Stern. I love Howard Stern.
Mhm.
And he says, "Oh, sounds like or looks like OJ's talking again." And I was like, "Oh shit." And he's like, "OJ Simpson did a radio show in Buffalo." And I thought, "Oh shit." And I'm not getting excited at all. I can feel, I can feel my heart starting to pound, like I'm
Oh,
about to get reamed by Howard Stern. And he says, and he goes on for a bit. The buildup is going, and he's like, he appeared on, and he used our call letter. I don't remember what our call letters were. We were 10-9 or 10. Fuck, I can't even remember the station. I mean, we were rinky dink. And he's like, and he was on a show. He was on the Tim Graham show, and I just said, motherfucker. And my foot was about to hit the brake, and I was going to pull off onto the burn. There's not even a sidewalk there. And I was going to pull off because I didn't know if I was going to be able to keep driving. And so I'm starting to slow down and maybe even had the blinker on to get off onto the shoulder. And he says, "I like this Tim Graham. Like, this guy asked," and I was like, "Oh, thank God." And then we listen, and then I got on the 990, and I'm listening, and he's giving OJ the business. I mean, he is just totally going all in on OJ, like, for being an asshole and a murderer, and what's this guy's problem. But he at least acknowledged, I think he was acknowledging that you got to do the interview. Like, of course, now OJ says, now I wouldn't give him the time of day. And he's making fun of his Twitter and all that stuff. I wouldn't give him the time of day. Here, meanwhile, Howard Stern is using my audio for his content. Of course, he's giving OJ the time of day. And if OJ said, "Howard, I want to do your radio show," Howard would absolutely have him on.
Right.
But anyway, that was my, oh shit, here we go. And
Wasn't that your Twitter profile or avatar? Wasn't that aligning your Twitter profile at one
I think it
time?
still is.
Yeah, I like this.
Huge
I like this
Stern guy. I'm a huge Howard Stern listener. And so to make
I
it
like
onto
this
his
Tim
show
Graham.
in that way, and I thought for sure that I was gonna turn into a pinata. And because that's the nature of his persona, or Howard Stern's personality and everything. And he's he right after Norm Macdonald, I think it's Howard Stern as being like the number one anti-OJ guy. But it validated, that even Howard Stern, the guy who could have shit all over me, didn't. And I thought, okay, I dodged that bullet because I was right. And I always knew all along I was right, but I did think that I was going to take some unwarranted heat, and even the unwarranted heat didn't necessarily materialize.
We're winding down here with Tim Graham again, who's fighting through a sore throat to be on the show with me tonight. So I don't know if you've watched it yet, but recently on Netflix, they just had a new OJ Simpson docuseries on their limited series. And I thought it was a fascinating, well done. And again, this was 1994, and all these years later, people still want to know and get every little thing. And I'm thinking, I thought of you during the series, and I'm like, you watch something and you got your own opinions, but then I'm thinking of you, and I'm like, you must have such a unique perspective on watching something like that, because I look at the show and I see OJ Simpson in court, or I see OJ Simpson, in other various interviews earlier in his career and stuff. You see somebody that you've sat down with multiple times and have had conversations with. I kind of get a feeling that you have more of a perspective of, what he's like. Do you think he's being honest? Is he full of shit? Stuff like that you have that unique perspective on, that there's probably but a small handful of people in the world, certainly in journalism, that would be able to have that kind of perspective when you go and you watch a docuseries on Netflix or HBO Max or whatever it may be. Like, you got that unique perspective on it when you watch stuff like that on TV.
I don't feel like it changed, because I did watch all that stuff before I interviewed OJ. The Made in America documentary, which is one of the greatest docuseries ever made. In fact, I think it won an Academy Award, didn't it?
Yeah.
I wasn't a huge OJ trial guy back in the 90s. I didn't watch all the different, you know, the theatrical, the drama, the remakes. What do they call that when you um, reenactments?
Yeah.
Is how they call them. I didn't watch the reenactments or any of that stuff, but um, and I think I still watch them the same way. I don't. It's detached. I mean, he was so much. He was so larger than life that even I recall even when I was walking up to his front door and knocked on it for the first time, feeling no different than if I were walking up to Connor McGovern at his locker stall. I mean, again, I haven't seen him yet. He's behind the door, or walking into the Bills locker room or the Sabres locker room as I've done for decades. I felt no different. And then he answers the door and you see him. And that's the thing. There's that, that barrier, that glass barrier that you have through television or seeing in magazines. I mean, you've absorbed OJ Simpson for decades. And then when you're face to face with him right there, it's a surreal feeling because that's almost like the definition of surreal. It's real, but you've looked at it through this filter of so long of him being on a two-dimensional page, untouchable. Right. You can't talk to it. And now there it is.
Yeah.
And that was the weirdest moment. Well, two weird moments stand out. Now it passed pretty quickly because, and I think that was the lead to my first story that people took exception to also because it humanized him, is dishwasher was beeping and he couldn't figure out how to turn it off. So he answers the door and he's like, "Hey," first thing he says, and he did this with everybody, I think, from Western New York, talking proud. "Hey, Buffalo, talking proud." And then but immediately he turns around. He's like, "I can't figure out how to turn off this dishwasher." And he like walks away and he's like apologizing. And it was disarming. It was like, it's again, finger quotes here, regular guy moment. And you go from this is OJ to it's just a man. It's just a dude.
Yeah.
Now we go off to the patio, and another moment where it sunk in again was after a long period of time of interviewing him, half hour or so, we're into it. And again, I guess it's the disarming nature of it. It sinks in, and I look down at his hands as he's talking, and I think I remember he had a McDonald's coffee, and he's got his hand around the coffee cup, and I remember myself thinking, those are the hands. And it was almost like I had to force myself, like, you got to remember who you're talking to here. Like, you got to remember that this is OJ Simpson. This isn't Connor McGovern. This isn't, but again, it shouldn't change how I ask the questions or my approach or everything. But it was just one of those things like, Tim, you're not in Kansas anymore. Like this is a BFD, right? And I used this line as in his real obituary when I wrote it for The Athletic, when he died, and I wrote a story on my take on OJ Simpson. The last line, and I'm paraphrasing, or at least it was in the last paragraph, was, no matter what you think of OJ, because people are always asking me, what's he like? What's he like? He is disarmingly charming. He's a nice guy, right? Again, that you can say that. I'm saying that when you're talking to him, he's a nice guy.
Yes.
And so again, this was my last line. And people, I set it up with people always ask me, what was he like? And my answer is that whatever you think he did, then your belief is validated. Because if you didn't think he did it, if you don't think he did it, then you would say, there's no possible way this guy could have done it. I'm absolutely right. This guy could not have killed his wife and another man.
Yeah.
But if you do think he did it, then you would think this is exactly the kind of guy who gets away with it. Yeah. And it's like, whatever you think, that's what he is. And I held both of those, it's dichotomous, but I held both of those thoughts because as I'm writing these stories, I never wanted to get into a point of where I thought hard one way or the other. I'm not writing this as a defense of him or he's misunderstood or anything like that. And I also didn't want it to bleed into my stories of this man's a double murderer. I wanted it to be as down the middle because look, there's nobody out there who doesn't know this story. By the time you get to the headline and see by Tim Graham, Buffalo News, and you have got to maybe there's the Dateline Las Vegas. Before you even read the first sentence that I wrote, you already know what you think about O.J. Simpson.
100%.
You already know, finger quotes again, you already know what he did. I'm not here to convince you one way or the other. I'm just here to tell you a story about the most fascinating, controversial villains, pop culture
Ever.
I mean, we're talking what? Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Who else? Elvis. I mean, Elvis, I mean, yeah, he had a little bit of a dark side, but I mean, who else are we talking about? Maybe not even Elvis. I mean, if Elvis had ever been accused of murder, that would be like, that's how big that would be, right? Michael Jackson and his child molestation accusations.
Yeah.
I think we're probably looking at Michael Jackson, and, maybe there's a politician out there. I don't know. Bill Clinton. I think O.J. Simpson's bigger than that.
One day when you're in your 70s or 80s and you're on a boat, hopefully healthy and well, and you're fishing or something, you look back and be like, dude, I sat down with OJ twice, and it had put out 2 killer features. It still blows my mind.
Unintended?
To this day. Unintended. Yes.
2 killer features?
That was completely unintended. I did not give away what I think, but
oh wait, hang on a second. Let me see if I kept something from my second interview with OJ. Bear with me. It might take me like 15 seconds to find it.
Go ahead, because while you're getting that, I'll tell you, I was blown away when he came to Buffalo a handful of years ago, how many people wanted his autograph and wanted to take pictures with him and had his jersey on. And they were the happiest people in the world to get photos with O.J. Simpson. That blew my mind.
Now, I've sat down with OJ a bunch of times. Yeah, I actually, as it was supposed to be off the record, but I did it because I wanted to learn. I was at a gathering with him at Bada Bing. He was in for a Bills game and he wanted to watch all the football games because he's into fantasy football so much. He wanted to be in a place that had all the games. And so he had a big gathering of all of his old Buffalo friends. And so I've been around OJ a bunch, and a lot of it is observing other people and how they interact with OJ. It is fascinating. Now, I believe, and I put this in my second story, that he confuses a lot of the adulation for acceptance. And acceptance isn't the word. There's a better word I'm looking for, but of people believing him but I think there are also a lot of people who just want their picture taken with somebody so famous that they put their arm around OJ and smile and be like, oh, Juice, great, thanks. And then he's texting and be like, look at this asshole. I just got a picture with, the most notorious killer of all time.
Right.
But I think in that moment, OJ views it as validation.
He reinvented himself, Tim, somewhat on Twitter. The catchphrase, yours truly, that became really popular in some ways. To your point, at least he thought he did anyway. But I would read the comments because I was always fascinated in what people would say about O.J. Simpson. And you'd have, that's a killer joke or whatever. And they'd be making fun of him and shit too. But there were a lot of people who genuinely liked him to some extent, especially with younger people who maybe they weren't around in the 90s during this trial and stuff. I feel like he kind of reinvented himself as a popular pop culture figure near the end over those last 4 or 5 years or so.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, the Twitter guy, I mean, I think maybe there are some people out there who are of a different generation, don't know why this man's so famous. But I don't know. The story's so big.
Yeah.
Bear with me. I think it's worth it.
Okay.
I got my COVID card here. Oh, I found it.
Okay.
So at the time, you're not going to be able to tell what this is really. Oh, shoot. And I should take this out and frame it or something. So
We can at least explain it.
So at the time, the Athletic had a no alcohol policy for expenses. And you had to itemize things and whatever. And, they rescinded it because, alcohol is a way that people do business. It's, you get a source and you're sitting and you get a couple of drinks. So,
Sure.
this was the receipt from the SG Bar on Flamingo Road in Las Vegas. And, I don't know if you can see it, but I say, is it washed out from the light?
I could see it. Well, see, I got a dark screen in front of me because of my
So
lighting.
it says O.J. Simpson here. I'm like, O.J. Simpson on his Tito's Bloody Marys.
Tito's Bloody Marys. That's what he was drinking.
We ate breakfast. There were 4 of us, so I came to $100. But at the bottom, I write, alcohol was O.J. Simpson's. And they made for a great interview. I put at the bottom. This was fully reimbursed.
It was reimbursed too?
It was fully, yes. You can't argue with that. But it was my lead. And 2 Bloody Marys. Let me see if I can. I'll read you the lead.
Such fascinating stuff to me. It really, truly is. I mean, how you feel about O.J. Simpson? Again, he's arguably the most polarizing pop culture figure of our lifetimes. And the fact that he got famous in Buffalo playing football just makes it, given that local slant, more than anything, although he's just as huge, good or bad, anywhere pretty much in the world, but still feels a little more connected to Buffalo. Mm-hmm.
So here's my lead that I came up with. And he ordered a Bloody Mary and I'm like, all right, this is maybe a little too good. This is the journalist in me, or the writer in me talking, is when OJ's like, maybe I'll have a Bloody Mary. I'm like, oh boy. And then he had another one. And so it starts off with Dateline Las Vegas. O.J. Simpson is halfway through his second Bloody Mary when he turns philosophical. Second, come on.
Oh,
that's poetry right there.
Bloody
I'm not saying I'm not saying what I wrote is poetry, but the image of OJ, just the word blood. The whole
Bloody
thing.
Mary.
Like OJ, low self-awareness from OJ, ordering a couple, but he's just living his life. But the only thing missing was if he were wearing one glove while drinking his second Bloody Mary.
Did you watch that recent Netflix documentary?
I haven't.
It's good.
Only because, I did so much research on him before interviewing him, and there have been so many of them. I did start episode 1, and I felt like I wasn't learning anything. Like, I think in one of those documentaries, I need to be told something new right away, or something. You got to hint at something we haven't seen yet. And that Made in America documentary was so thorough that I got maybe 20 minutes to a half hour into the episode 1, and I just felt like it was getting a little redundant.
It's you're starting to see in pop culture swinging back to things that, back when we were younger were the big, like the Menendez brothers trial and now the O.J. Simpson trial. I think it's more geared towards maybe younger people who maybe haven't seen those other documentaries that are kind of starting from scratch and learning with that. Let me ask you one more question, Tim, then I'm going to let you go. All right, so
I'm long-winded, and I realize you have probably more questions. I'll stay as long as you fucking want.
No, dude, listen, I love the OJ stuff, man.
You got me digging through my files here.
I know, I love it. We could have went on for 2 hours just about that, because I just think it's so fascinating. And again, no matter how you feel about OJ Simpson, I'm talking about the public out there, just getting an opportunity to do something that big is just such a notch on a belt. It truly is. Who is a sports figure out there, or any figure for that matter, that you would have loved or would love still to have a chance to sit down with and maybe crank out some kind of feature story that you've never had that chance? Like someone out there who really fascinates you, that in a perfect world, you can get out there, you can sit down with them, hopefully under better circumstances than OJ, and be able to really crank out something that you would love to do. Someone
the OJ
that you haven't had
circumstances were great. I got trips to Vegas out of it, and the weather was great, and he was incredibly cooperative. There were no intruders at all. Again, I guess that's ironic that the phrase I keep using is an
We
intruder.
keep dropping these things. Bloody Mary intruders. I said killer sit downs.
I just dawned on me about it. I'm so in the journalism mindset that okay, that was totally unintentional when I brought it up before. And anybody watching, I think you can see my face. Like I'm totally just on autopilot talking about intruders.
Now, who's someone you'd love to sit down with? You'd love to do a feature with that you never really had a chance to, but somebody who really intrigues you, someone you think you could do some really good work with.
You told me you were going to ask me that, and I couldn't come up with a good. So it would have to be somebody that offers some originality. I wouldn't want. Let's Mike Tyson, for instance. I mean, what's left? I mean, unless there are some secrets out there, Mike, I just don't see that. I think if
there was a time you would have said Mike Tyson, though, I would be willing to bet that.
For sure. I think if he's, you need to know that he's going to be a willing participant in the interview. But Marshawn Lynch would be on my list. But you don't know what you're going to have to deal with in terms of peeling back the onion or, you know, if he's going to just screw with you the entire time.
Yeah. That'd be a fascinating read, though. I mean, he never talks to anyone from Buffalo.
Bill Belichick would be one in a similar vein if he's willing to, you know, talk about some personal things. Do you have any that come to mind that you would?
My first thought, but then I'm not going to say you shot it down. My first thought with you would have been Tyson, but then you kind of made a good point at the end. It's like, what's really left to tell at this point? I mean, I don't know what's there anymore. There certainly would have been a time, though, with you, I would have absolutely said Mike Tyson. That was my first inclination with you.
Maybe a good way to do a Tyson feature would be if he gave you some unlimited access and you were able to be with him in different settings. And again, similar to my observations of OJ when he was here in Buffalo, just to observe, just to see how people interact with him. Maybe it's that, you know, people have done stories about Muhammad Ali like that all the time. It's about how people react to him, not necessarily the Ali out to the world, but the world back to Ali. Is an interesting way to do some stories. He might be one of those that would be good for that.
Do you wish boxing was more prominent in Buffalo? Because I mean, it's well known you covered boxing before. But there's nothing going on in Buffalo really with boxing.
No. I watched the Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight with Joe Macy.
Yeah, that's right.
Out at Amherst Pizza and Ale House. And it was good to get connected with him. And I think we're of the same mind. Like, he loves boxing and the history. And I think views himself as somebody who is a defender of the sport and its status and what it means historically. And, you know, the gladiatorial aspect of it, and, you know, how all the things that are good and valiant about boxing, but is also, and I'm don't want to speak with him for him, but we were in quite a bit of agreement regarding it's just gone. It just doesn't exist anymore. And I don't think it's not just a Buffalo thing. I mean, it's hard to follow the fighters, and there are so many reasons why. You know, the amateur ranks are decimated. You don't spend nearly as much time in the amateurs as you should. People turn pro right away. They wash out faster. You don't know their stories. There's more foreign influence, which isn't bad from a competition standpoint, but it makes it different from a storytelling standpoint.
100%.
We just don't know we just don't know these people.
Yeah.
And I recall when I did a story for the Buffalo News back as a lead-in for the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. And I went into that fight with the belief that this is going to be the last great American fight. And I know that Pacquiao is Filipino, but in terms of, and I think it's kind of held to be true, it's like the last fight that Americans still were going to be into boxing, because after that it was going to fall off. You didn't know that if there was another mainstream combination of fighters you could come up with that was like Pacquiao Mayweather. And I stopped in and I did like a little road trip. And I went through Canastota, where the International Boxing Hall of Fame is. And I went to Philly and did some interviews by the Rocky statue, by the steps, and interviewed some people about, and some school age kids about who the heavyweight champion of the world is. And out of, eighth grade, they were eighth graders. I mean, it used to be ubiquitous. Everybody knew who the heavyweight champion was, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're standing at the Rocky statue, and I think it was 80 kids and maybe 17 adults, chaperones. It was from a school in Kentucky. They were on a field trip. Nobody knew who the heavyweight champion was. But I went through the WBC rankings with Larry Holmes in Easton, Pennsylvania. I stopped off and had an appointment with Larry Holmes, and we met at his bar, and we sat there and we went through the WC rankings, and he was the WBC champion. So this is his alma mater, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I included it in the story, and it was like, yeah, I know him. Nope. Is that a joke? Then I'm doing the back and I do the name, and he's just like, are you putting me? At some point he thinks I'm making up names. And these were the top 10 rankings. Like, he knew one guy.
Yeah.
And this was, what would this have been? when was that fight? 2014 or something like that, maybe. I'm taking a stab at it, but roughly in that range. That's 10 years ago. And Larry Holmes didn't know who the contenders were then. And this is a guy who was involved.
You bring up
Floyd Mayweather, by the way. I mean, just to put a bow on that one. So I'm in Las Vegas then for the fight the week of, and I'm in a group. They bring in a select group of reporters to interview Floyd Mayweather. And it's a group setting, but it's a small one. It's not the news conference, where they have everybody on the dais and they do everything really fancy. And there's so much pomp and circumstance. And Floyd Mayweather was talking about how much he is a notorious gambler. Like, he loves to bet on college basketball, the Super Bowl, whatever it is. And he mentioned how he won't bet on boxing. And the reason he won't bet on boxing is he doesn't know the fighters. And the added twist to that is Floyd Mayweather at the time, I don't know if he still is, was a promoter. He had his own promotional.
Yeah.
And he's still, well, what the fuck's it going to take to know the fighters? You're you're fighting, you're actively fighting, you're in gyms, you promote, you're like,
and you don't even know who they are.
You still don't know who these guys are?
That is,
how do you expect us to follow it?
And to your point too, it's not necessarily that the fighters are so much inferior than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Is that you don't know them. You don't know their stories. There's no investment.
I think they are probably inferior though, too, because of the lack of amateur aspect of it.
They don't stay in amateur.
The formative years aren't there. I mean, think of the U.S. Olympic team and how few medals there have been. I mean, it used to be guys came out of the Olympics household names already. Ray Leonard, Cassius Clay, George Foreman, Evander Holyfield, Pernell Whitaker, Oscar De La Hoya, on and on and on. They came out of the Olympics already minted as future, it was like, you get the baseball cards, we're talking about those baseball cards back. You find out who BJ Surhoff is. Well, I guess I know this BJ Surhoff's going to be pretty. Greg Jeffries, he's a rated rookie, all that stuff. You don't have that anymore.
What's an event that you would like to cover that you haven't?
The Olympics, for sure. I've never covered the Olympics.
Really?
I would love to cover the Olympics. And if I could pick specifically the Olympics, the track and field, I'd like to be in the arena for the 100 meters. Look, I know it's tough you can't just say, I'm not just going to reach out to the athletic and say, hey, put me on the 100 meters this year. Sometimes you cover the Olympics and you go where they tell you, but that's the only remaining thing. I've covered Super Bowls. I've covered big time boxing events, and I don't think anything can match that with the exception of something like the 100 meters in the Olympics.
What would it mean? So you've been in Buffalo. You're not born in Buffalo, but you've been in Buffalo for a long time. You've covered Buffalo sports for a long time. Do you get a sense of what it would mean? Because I'm a Bills fan. I'm unapologetic about it. I don't even know how I would feel if the Bills finally won a Super Bowl. I mean, I know obviously I'd be thrilled and happy, but to what level, I don't know. Like, what do you think it would be like to cover a Buffalo Bills team that finally does break through and ultimately win a Super Bowl? Like, is this city going to go to the ground? I I don't know what it would be like, but I can imagine. Now, look, you're not a Bills fan. I know that, but I'm sure you would probably like to cover in this
Yeah.
city a Super Bowl champion and, the
Or a
reaction
Stanley
from
Cup
fans.
champion. I mean, yeah.
That's not going to happen. I don't even
I would
bother including them. I'm not even going to include them. I won't go down the Terry Bagula Road Sabres with you tonight on this show, but
Yeah, I
yes,
would I've never done it. I mean, that's a thing too. I mean, for selfish reasons, I would like to do it.
yeah,
Obviously, I'd feel happy for the people in my life who I love and care for, and my friends, my family, everybody who would be
sure.
happy, who would be elated, who would cry tears of joy. I want them to be happy, of course.
I really thought it was
I
coming
would,
this
I
year,
would,
Tim.
I mean, but I would want it for myself. I've never done it.
Yeah.
I,
I really thought it was coming this year. I don't want to get into a review of this past season. I
no,
just felt
Pat, hey, look,
all season long, something felt different to me until the fourth quarter of that game, and then it ended the way it ends against the Kansas City Chiefs. It felt different. Like this was going to be the breakthrough year
I'm
for the
going to
Bills.
look it up, and then I want to see what game it was.
I just can't buy the Sabres. I can't even get into an imagination stage right now with the Buffalo Sabres of them making the playoffs. Maybe that's about as deep as I can go when it comes to the Sabres.
On December 5th, so this was after the San Francisco game, obviously a hell of a stretch in which, they beat Kansas City, they
Mhm.
beat San Francisco, but they haven't played Detroit yet. On December 5th, I'm having a text conversation with Chris Parker, and I say, this could be the year they do it. You've never heard me talk like that. And he says,
Yeah.
no, sir, I have not. And that is the first time I'm always, like a little, skeptical and cynical, I would think too. I think over the years, I'm like, probably not, percentage chances. No, they're not gonna. But there was something in me after that San Francisco game where it started to feel, and again, this is me having done it for 30 years, not necessarily at the professional level, but having covered sports for 30 years, having watched them for 40, having 45, but being in locker rooms and everything, comes to it. You get, I don't know, there's get a gut feeling sometimes. And I'd never felt compelled to say that and actually come out and say, this could be it. I'm usually the guy that says, now we'll see.
All right.
I was there. I just that something felt different. And, I felt it maybe in 2006 with the Sabres. Um, but then things started falling apart,
Yeah.
with them against Carolina in the Eastern Conference Final. But the Bills, I mean, something was going to they would have to fall apart for me to get off of the feeling that I had. And they never did. They never did fall apart. I'm talking about health wise. I mean, they ran up against a team that is really good.
Yeah.
And I do think they're close. I don't think that you look at what Philadelphia did against Kansas City and say, oh, well, wow, now we're close against Kansas City, but we'll never be able to get over on a team like Philly. I don't look at it that way. Every it's like styles make fights, to use another boxing phrase. I mean, the Bills' offensive line is way better than the Chiefs' offensive line. Vic Fangio wouldn't have been able to do what he did against the Chiefs from a deployment standpoint. All kinds of reasons. The Bills'
I
run
agree.
game's better. There's all kinds. You never know. You
I agree.
never know.
And
And
it's
I
a
think
week
that
to
it's
week league.
dangerous to look at what the Eagles did against the Bills and say, that's the way the Bills need to now build themselves, because the Chiefs are a moving target. They might not even be the team to beat next year.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a
so
week to week league, Tim. Like the Rams the Eagles barely held on to beat the Rams in the NFC division. The Rams came from the West Coast in the windy, cold snow, had the ball with a chance to beat Philly at the end of that divisional round game. So, I mean, look, you never know. I got one more thing for you. This is a podcast. I want to end talking about your show real quick, Tim Graham and Friends with Jonah Bronstein. Um, do you enjoy doing your podcast? Like you do a lot of writing and stuff, and I know, like, I'm very appreciative. We've been going at it now for 90 minutes. Is it a nice release for you sometimes, an outlet to be able to just talk about whatever you want? And what I love, and I've said this before, what I love about your show the most and I got to make sure I wrap this as a compliment, is it's the most like kind of like casual type vibe podcast that I listen to. You and Jonah sound like you're having
What
a
about yours?
conversation. It
Yours is
doesn't
about as
sound like,
casual it gets.
well, maybe it depends on who the guest is, I guess. But, I'm not talking about like the fancy microphones and the lighting and, the high tech cameras and all. It's not
Hey,
looking like a TV show or radio type production. You guys got kind of like almost like an old school podcast. And I mean that in the most complimentary of ways. It just feels very like I'm sure you and Jonah say, all right, well, we're going to talk about this, that, and this today. And
pretty
then you just
much.
got to riff. Then you got to riff a lot. You know what I mean? It sounds like you dudes got a tape recorder at a bar and you're
Right.
just
It
shooting this
is
shit over a
pretty,
couple beers.
it's the same, approach that Tyler Dunn and I took all those years ago. And you're
Yeah.
right. That is what Tyler and I used to do. We'd sit down in a bar and let it rip and hope that there wasn't too much noise going on in the background to come through the mics. Jonah and I are doing it in a controlled environment, so we don't have to worry about that. But beyond that, it's the same thing. And we do come up. The funny thing about it, and Jonah and I laugh about it all the time, is there are some weeks we don't know what we're going to talk about, especially in the summer. And we will say, all right, well, then we'll make it a quick one. Let's just, do one, 20 minutes, half hour. And at an hour and 10 minutes, we're wrapping up. It just happens that way. And we have a lot to talk about. We try to be thoughtful. Jonah, I think, is the best journalist in Western New York. And I'm not saying that because he's my co-host. He knows it all and he can speak on anything. He covers it all, whether it be for Channel 4 or the Associated Press or, whoever he's been working for over the years. He's in the press boxes. He's in the locker rooms, Sabres and Bills. And nobody knows more about college sports.
Nope.
Or high school sports than he does. Now, a few years ago, you could probably argue Keith McShay. I know Frank Wolf and, there's different entities, but Jonah's out there and is talking to high school and college coaches every day. He's to whether it be text or in person, he goes to the games and he's everywhere. Every night he's somewhere. And he's probably the only guy other than maybe TV people who pass and maybe they'll go do a feature on, the girls basketball player from Lancaster High who's been dunking. Maybe Channel 4 will go out there and do a feature. But Jonah's at these games and he's at the Bills and he's at the Sabres games and he's at Damon College and he's at Canisius, Niagara rivalry game. I mean, he's at all UB football. He does everything. And so anyways, he's the best co-host and he probably should have his own show. So yeah, we can talk about anything, which is great. That's why, that's one of the reasons why I asked him to do it is his versatility. And he's only become more entrenched since we started doing the podcast all those years ago because he wasn't working for Channel 4 at the time. Yeah, he's great.
Do you still enjoy podcasting? Do you enjoy doing it? Or is it part of the gig? You know what I mean? Because pretty much everybody's got to have a podcast, whether they want one or not. Everyone's got one.
Right. I think it's still more part of the gig when I do mine than when I do this. Like I look forward to this because I can come and sit down and you're going to run the show. And again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm pretty transparent. I'm not going to dodge a question. So I don't care what you're going to ask me. I sit down, I made my coffee. Again, here we're now at 11 and I'm drinking coffee. And at 53 years old, I'm going to be up until about 5:30. I'm going to binge something. And I've been meaning to start Severance, so maybe I'll start that tonight.
Me too.
My daughter's off school this week. I know there's some shows she wants to watch, so maybe we'll watch something here. But yeah, I can just sit down with you and do. This to me that's why I say we can go for two. This is fun. I like this. Now and again, when I sit down with the podcast, and as you know, and as anybody who does a podcast know, when you hit the end button here, you're not done. I'm done. No. You're like, I get to go and, grab something to eat and turn the TV on. You got to produce this thing. You got to go through and do your, the audio and, present this and gussy
show notes and, all those.
Yeah. That's the part that I hate because I can rip out a podcast, but then you got to build in the post game the post production.
Post-production, yeah.
And anyways, but it's not hard. It's not hard.
I do. I'll tell you what, man. I really do appreciate you, man. I mean that too, man. Giving up
Likewise.
your time.
Likewise.
I love the fact that I could always reach out to you, and if you can do it, you can do it. If something comes up and you can't, you won't be able to. But I know if you can, you're more than willing to. You don't feel well. You had shit going on all day, and you still offered to meet me at the restaurant. If it would have been easier for me to meet you at a restaurant. Those are the type of things that I truly do appreciate, man. 7 years.
Anytime.
7 years I've been doing this.
Hey, who was your first guest? Was it Sal?
It was Sal. So quickly here, I mapped out my first 4 guests ahead of time. I talked to Sal. I talked to you. Then I don't know, I was trying to be artsy fartsy and have a variety type show. I had some 80s book writer on. No disrespect to him. He was fine, but I don't remember who it was anymore. And then remember scoring Doran Dickerson from the Buffalo Bills tight end? He was my 4th guest. I think he wasn't officially retired, but he didn't play anymore.
So he was still an active NFL player.
Yeah. So anyway,
that's a good get. I mean, look,
those two were
not easy for us to get guests.
Those weren't the plan, though. The plan was Sal, you, those 2 guys were mixed in. Then I had Jay on episode 5, Jay Skursky, and then I had Tyler Dunn on 6. And it was off and running from there. And I always have credited you guys because it's kind of instant credibility. And I'm not trying to toot your horn, but between, you, Sal, Jay, Tyler,
Sal's a smart launch because his reach is far and wide. And you knew that would be the best way for everybody to say what Patrick Moran's up to.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, that aside, I appreciate you. You've been on more than any of those guys. Let's just put it that way. And it's almost weird talking to you.
Who holds the record for most appearances?
Ah, man. Are you talking about real mainstream media guests?
No. It'd be
probably Buffalo Wins, Joe from Queens. Joe
of course. Yeah, he's on all the time.
He's been on like pretty much every week. So through the years, in terms of the media guys, you're right up there.
I always kind of considered him more like a co-host, though.
Joe?
Yeah.
It's weird because we fight about everything. I can't stand him, and he can't stand me. But it's fun podcasting, and we bicker and we fight. People actually like it, so it's actually enjoyment. But yeah, if it's either you or Matt Perino, it's one of you 2 guys that I've probably had on among the mainstream the most through these years. But anyway,
I unplugged my computer here.
No, I do appreciate you very much. Make sure you follow Tim on Twitter @byTimGraham. You're on Blue Sky as well. I got to integrate. I'm on there, but I'm not using it enough. Like I just put a link to the podcast up and then I bounce. I got to
give my very quick take. I know you're wrapping up here on Blue Sky. I think Blue Sky is better for engagement. Mm-hmm. For my stories, I notice, we know all the things that Elon Musk has said about how he throttles down the links and all that stuff on Twitter. And that shows I have only a fraction of the followers. I think I don't know if I'm at 9 yet, 8,000, 9,000 followers, whatever it is, as opposed to my 40,000, however many on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I get way more engagement on Blue Sky with way fewer followers.
Because they're more engaged.
But I'm also finding the political discussion getting pretty thick. And I'm starting to regardless of which side you're on Twitter, it's more right. It leans right. On mm-hmm. Blue Sky, it leans left. And I find that both of them make me want to put my phone down, which I think is healthy. It's not like I just need the reinforcement of my beliefs. It's just like, can I just look at I just want to see what's going on in sports right now. And I know that I can control that with the accounts I follow, but it's from accounts they're from non-political accounts. Anyways, I'm just saying, I think I'm on Blue Sky. Blue Sky's better engagement, but I don't love it.
Yeah, I hear you, man. All right. Thank you very much, Tim Graham. I appreciate your time so much, man. I will be back. Brand new episode. Matt Warren from SB Nation joins me tomorrow.